Hey everyone, Matt Thomas here. Thanks for watching. So I want to quickly go over a question that needs to be asked at all PLCs. And before I tell you what the question is, we have to understand why it needs to be asked at all PLCs. So we are born with an innate curiosity, right? It's how our brain is wired to learn. It's the first step of learning. We're born that way. We need that curiosity so that we can grow as human beings, right? So most of the growth that happens starts with curiosity. As babies, right, we're curious. We stick our hands and our toes in our mouth, right, because we're curious. We roll over because we're curious. We start to crawl because we're curious. We start to walk because we're curious. We see everyone else doing it, right? We want to do that. We're curious about doing that. Oftentimes people will misidentify fear of missing out for what really is just curiosity. So if you're like, Joey, don't look in the box, but everybody else gets to look in the box, Joey is going to want to look in the box, not because of fear of missing out, but because he's curious as to why everybody else gets to look in the box. He's curious about what's in the box now. So we want to take advantage of that. And oftentimes, if we bypass that first step of learning, it won't allow as much success as it could be, right? So we got to spark that curiosity right away. Curiosity can lead to interest. Interest can lead to motivation. That's intrinsic learning. And when that happens, magical things can happen, right? So that's just the students going, dude, I love this stuff, so I want to learn more. And they put more effort into it, and they can almost teach themselves, if you will. Now, I will say this, getting to motivation. Motivation can look very different for people, right? Some people are motivated by enjoying what they do. Like, dude, I love this stuff. I'm going to learn everything I can about it. Some people are motivated by acceptance, right? They're like, oh, I don't necessarily like this, but my parents want me to do it, so I'm going to go ahead and, do it successfully because I want to make them proud of me, right? Some people are motivated some students are motivated just because they like you as a teacher, right? You're their favorite teacher. They don't want to disappoint you. So motivation can be different things to different people. So we got to understand that first. We're born with innate curiosity. Curiosity is the first step of learning. We have to understand that. So now the question that needs to be asked at every PLC is, how are we going to get our students interested in the material? After we're done deciding the unit, let's say, as a ninth grade level team, hey guys, let's do unit 2. When we're done with unit 1, let's jump on to unit 2, or let's jump on to unit 3. No problem. Once we've agreed to the unit, then we go, all right, what are you guys going to do to spark interest, right? How are you going to get them motivated? Because in education, we use terms like anticipatory set and student engagement, but we don't break it down to what it really is. How are we going to get our students interested? That's what needs to be asked. Now, every teacher has their own different way. Hopefully, right, they have a way that they specifically think about, this is what I do to get my students interested. And so my way may not work for another teacher's way or vice versa, because, we do it based on our individual personalities. That's why it's important for each teacher to be able to share out, hey, here's how I'm going to do it, because another teacher can go, dude, I never thought of that, or not thought of it that way. I'm going to do that. And they can, adjust it and tweak it based on their teaching personalities. So, again, once it's agreed upon, what are we going to teach? Okay, how do we spark interest? This cannot be overlooked. This is something that needs to be asked right away, and it needs to be placed of major importance, because we're born with this innate curiosity. So, as an English teacher, let me give you my example. This is my poetry example. This is how I get students interested in poetry, and I do this on week 2. I'll explain why the timing is that and why it's so important. So this is what I do. Once class starts, I'll be like, hey guys, let me ask you a question, and please be honest with me. How many of you are just, when you hear the term poetry, right? How many of you are just not big fans of poetry in school? How many of you are just not big fans of poetry? It's not your thing. And so I raise my hand, right? Mirror neurons. It tells the students that they're allowed to raise their hand, because you guys don't like poetry so much. And then most of the hands go up, and I'm like, cool, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys saying that. Thank you. I create acknowledgement with their feelings, and that starts to create trust. And then I go, hey guys, just out of curiosity, how many of you are like me? You're like a big music fan. And I say that, right? So it's like shared interest. How many of you are big music fans? I have my hand up too. Again, mirror neurons. And the students are like, yeah, most of the hands go up. They just love music. Perfect. And then I say this. I go, okay, here's my challenge today. My challenge is, most of you said you didn't care for poetry too much, and I totally understand why. I get it. My challenge is to convince you, or at least share with you, how not only it's not that you don't like poetry, you actually kind of love it. You just maybe haven't been taught in a way that tells you that you love poetry, right? You love poetry, you just don't necessarily know it yet. And I say, that's what I need to do today. That's my challenge. So I've created intrigue. So the students are like, well, how are you going to do that, right? So I've sparked them a little bit. Then I play a game, right? And so I don't tell them it's a game. I'm like, hey, do me a favor, go ahead. Do you mind turning the lights off real fast? And so a student drops the lights. That starts to create dopamine. Do you remember back in like elementary school when the teacher turned the lights off and rolled that AV cart down the aisle and you're like, woo, we're watching a movie, right? So it's creating dopamine. And so that's what I'll do. I'm like, okay, I'll have the student drop the light. They know something different is going on. And I'm like, we're going to play a game. And I say, when I show the slide of the game, collectively as a group, do you guys mind yelling out the name of the game? Kind of like Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune. So I'll say, all right, let's play the newest game that's sweeping the nation. Guess the author by the poem. And I'm like, all right, let's get started. And I'll tell the students, I'm going to say some poem lyrics, some poetry lines. And collectively as a group, just as soon as you know the author, just yell it out. No need to raise your hand, just yell it out, right? So I'm getting them involved, getting the excitement going. And then I'll start with this. I'll say 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. And everyone's like, Dr. Seuss. And I'm like, cool, yeah, nice job. And then I'll say, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And someone's like, oh, Shakespeare, right? They start getting involved, cool. And then I'll do, once upon a time, a few mistakes ago, I was in your sights and you got me alone. And it's usually a pause. And the student's like, what? And someone finally goes, Taylor Swift? And I'm like, yeah, Taylor Swift. And they're like, oh. And then I start doing more music lyrics, song lyrics, popular songs. Every year, I update my music preferences, right? And so usually by 3 or 4, the students are figuring out that I'm doing song lyrics. And I'll mix in some metal. If you look at the slideshow, you see this is a Metallica song. I'll mix in some metal. I'll mix in some punk. If I've noticed a student wearing a Green Day shirt, like the day before or a couple days before, I'll mix in some Green Day. I'll try to make it class specific depending on if students wear certain, band shirts. And so the point being, I usually do about 20 songs. And once I'm done with that, then I give them the speech, the talk. Then I'm like, okay, so I say, at the beginning of this, I explained how, I asked you guys how many of you didn't like poetry, and you're like, I don't like it. I'm like, I get it. And I asked you how many of you love music. And I say, this is what I think about poetry. And this is 100% accurate. I totally believe this. I tell the class, I say, I think poetry is taught wrong in school. And I say, well, okay, maybe not wrong, incompletely. Maybe not incorrectly, incompletely. Because what we teach is, certain poems out of a textbook. But music, song lyrics are the #1 form of poetry in the world, bar none. There's not even a close second. So I asked the students, why don't we in school teach poetry the way that's the most accessible to you guys, the way that you enjoy it the most? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, I don't know either. And so I say, that's why when we do poetry, we're going to reference songs a lot. And we do. We do probably 2/3 of the poetry taught is usually in song lyrics, and then the other thirds, save for the other type of poetry. So my point being is, this whole thing takes about 20 minutes. And I've got the students engaged. I've got them loud. I've got them going. I've got us doing a game. I've got them learning valuable things about poetry. I've created dopamine. I've created a shared interest. I've created acknowledgement and trust. I've created the most important part. It sets the tone. This is why I do it week 2. It sets the tone that this class is going to be different than any other English class I've ever taken. And it sets the tone for the students that they go, dude, we're going to love this class. And so what I've done, to go to the very last slide here, is I've sparked interest in not only poetry, but in the class as a whole. They're like, dude, this is going to be a cool class. And then now I can't let up, right? So my next lesson, whatever it's going to be, has to have some type of interest spark, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I map out my lessons. I usually do a lot of these type of games. I've talked about that in other videos. I think I even have a video on it. But the point being is, to conclude this video, during your PLCs, you have to ask the question, once you decide what you're teaching, it has to be asked, how are we going to get our students interested in the material? Not just holistically, but like that, the first lesson. How are we going to hook these guys into this thing? And as a teacher, when you're writing your lesson plans, that's how you want every single, not only just every single unit, but at times every single lesson. All right, how am I going to spark them on Tuesday? How am I going to be excited for Wednesday's class, right? Now there's days like you write an essay for 4 days, you got to write the essay. So maybe not every single day you have to create this, but the majority you do. You want to create that interest in what your students, or spark that interest and that curiosity in what you're teaching. Thanks, guys.